nothing, I assume.
TDM is in place right now.
Voluntarily.
Yeah, voluntarily.
Okay, all right, got
But
it.
right,
But there's no.
this document,
Right,
and let me just speak to that very briefly, the timing. You're aware that there's an August implementation date.
right,
Sacred Heart is requesting an extension of that so we can get through this timeline, and because we certainly have an identified issue. And so the city engineer has granted an extension, I believe, till July of next year. Yeah, July of 2014. So if we have to go through that environmental process, we now have the time to do that.
all right.
That's a piece of new news.
Yeah.
That's correct.
All right.
It's brand new news.
It's been,
Now, it's till
what we've
July
been working
next
out
year.
since
So
this
it's a
meeting.
one-year extension time.
Correct.
Right now.
Hold on one second.
So that was, the pressure to make a decision last week
Correct.
was because we were told that, you know, there was no.
Time
way out.
expired.
Time
And we
expired.
worked that out. We
Right.
found a way to
So
legally
now
work that
that's
out.
off our shoulders. We don't have to worry about that.
Right.
Yes.
So then, okay, so let me say what I'm thinking, and then you can, other people can think differently. So my inclination is that since we have something that is in place, that we've agreed to, that is all taken care of except for the environmental, I would have a tendency to keep with the plan we have and look at the environmental. And the reason for that is that if the environmental came back with the finding that, you know, this isn't really an appropriate approach, then we have to find one that is an appropriate approach, and then it may become this one. So all we're doing is reversing the fusing mechanism in my mind, in the sense that if it comes back and says this mitigation, this needs to be mitigated, and the mitigation is something that we think is not appropriate and the school doesn't think is appropriate, then we end up with the fallback of the traffic TDM. And that
Or
to
something
me,
else.
right, now, that in a sense is a little bit more foggy for the school, because they have to continue the bond and all these other things. But for me, it leaves the town in a more defensible position in terms of why we did what we did, all right? You have to tell me from a legal standpoint what's more defensible, but I can say that
Addendum,
there.
it's wholly unrealistic. The mitigation, the substitute, I don't know that
So,
it's any more legally defensible.
well, here's the defensibility from the standpoint of a planning perspective that I'm looking at, is that if you said to me, what was the reason you didn't go with the original plan? And I said, well, I found out about this environmental thing, and I didn't want to
Remove the heritage.
I didn't want to remove the heritage trees, but I did do an environmental analysis of that. It could say that, you know, the environmental impact of the trees is, being removed, is less than the environmental impact or the area impact of what we're looking at doing. So I would not want to be in a situation where somebody said, the reason you didn't do that is because you didn't want to do the environmental impact analysis. All right, so I want to be in a situation where everybody looked at the facts that they were, and what our intent was, as well as the rationale for why we went to Plan B. Now, that's one train of thought. The other train of thought is, I'm comfortable with this mitigation, provided we understand the limitations of 6,000 does seem high to me, and if that's the limiter, then we have a lot of pain and agony before we're allowed to evaluate it. So that's the other aspect. So if I had a choice between one that we recommended, that was agreed to, and one that we think might work, I might have to bias towards the one we agreed to and investigate. So I'm looking for anybody else to come up with any ideas that helps me work through that.
Well, it's new news that we need an EIR for Plan A, so to speak.
Right.
And I think that's a good one. I think that the town engineering staff has granted a year's extension. Gives us some opportunity to do some further thinking on the matter. I visited the property, around the property in the last 2 days, and I guess my personal opinion is this, that something isn't working, TDM or whatever it is, because the traffic on Valparaiso is awful. And what we can do as a town, together with Menlo, together with Menlo School, Sacred Heart, as a group, to figure out some way to solve the problems along Valparaiso, we've got to do. We just can't let it keep on going the way it is, because it's going to be terrible in 5 years. It's bad now. The last couple of days in and around Sacred Heart, 2 days were different. One day had, I guess, parents' morning or something, and they were parked on Park Lane. Today, no parking was there was nobody there, but the traffic around on Park Lane was busy, to say the least. The delay time on Emily on to Valparaiso, as I sat there through it, was about 8 minutes. The delay on Emily, on Elena, I'm gonna guess was in the neighborhood of 6 to 7, compounded by construction trucks parking along the street
Yeah,
as well,
that's
which
bad.
is very, very difficult.
Tennis courts.
So, I'm not sure that TDM, a series of numbers is gonna solve the problem. So I'm, where I was the other day was, I think we have to retain some opportunity to do the intersections, but they aren't, just those two intersections are not gonna be a solution to the Valparaiso problems. So, those are my comments. Anybody else? Paul?
Well, I'm just starting to put my arms around this and have been trying to
You better have long arms.
and trying to inform myself as much as possible, going over the minutes. I know we didn't have a video from last month's meeting. And on the surface, the TDM program looks to me to make sense on the surface. I haven't investigated the site like you have. I don't get a chance to in the morning. If this buffer of time that Eric has brought up is actually something we can do, that's something I, could possibly be in favor of, because as a new commissioner, I need some more information here. And would we necessarily get more information out of the TDM reports if there is an interim time here, while we wait for an EIR or anything like that? I mean, is there any way that we can find out more about that if we decide to do something regarding the EIR?
Yeah, if we need to proceed with the, and I don't know that it's an EIR, it's an environmental analysis.
Okay, thank you.
And so sometimes we just say EIR as a
Mhm.
shortcut. But there would be, a time and expense associated with that for Sacred Heart to prepare that document. Staff prepares it, they pay for it, or we hire a consultant to do so. But we could probably, let's see, when was the last, we may be able to do one more traffic count to get some numbers on how those results are.
I just think that, like I said, on the surface, I'm looking through everything and I'm thinking, okay, well, we save the heritage trees. There's a mitigation program in place that seems to work. And to me, on the surface, like, wow, this looks like it's gonna work out. And that's me on the outside looking in, just kind of coming into this thing. Now, and hearing Phil's eyewitness reports of traffic on Valparaiso, and actually my wife has kind of said the same thing when she's traveled around town in the morning. And Mary Beth's traffic counts, I think those are other things that we need to think about, and how that affects the 6,000 number, if that's gonna be the cap. And so that there's a couple of things here that I wanted to come in and say, what am I not getting here? From what I can understand, this looks like it's gonna work. That's after reading through this stuff the past couple of days and kind of going over it, that was my opinion. So you both brought up a couple of things that I wanted to hear as far as, all right, this is my opinion right now. I need somebody to tell me why this isn't going to work. And I guess that's kind of what I'm asking.
Right, well, and I came into this meeting with that same place, so let me tell you where I was coming in. I felt that this was a good recommendation, but the fact that the new facts that we have in here about some of the things in terms of what it would take and why it didn't work before actually changed my thinking a little bit, because it gives us a different perspective on, first of all, the timeline. I was very concerned about the applicant timeline. So the number one thing is that this is a very willing and able and committed applicant. All right, so I don't want to have a situation where there's anything other than the fact that there's absolute trust here. But the other thing about it too is I want to make sure that we're doing something, first of all, that makes it a safe and environment for kids and for people in the neighborhood. Two, that we're doing something that actually does correct a problem with our traffic situation. And three, becomes up in a situation, one, that we can all afford, because I don't want the school to be charged too much for this process. I don't want the city to be charged too much for all this time. And that actually is a viable alternative. So if time allows us to have that viable alternative, I want to take it. If time makes it worse because everybody doesn't know what to go, then that's a new problem.
Is there an opportunity for public comment
There
in
will
this
be,
hearing?
open public hearing.
Thank you.
All right, so those are the kind of things that I want to think through, and I want to do that with the idea that we want to resolve this for the applicant, as well as making sure we're in compliance as a town. Because this applicant is one that I want to preserve their thinking about the partnership they've shown us. So I'll be interested in hearing the comments.
Any further commissioners' comments? Okay, now we'll open the public hearing. Anyone in the public like to be heard on this item?
Obviously, I would.
Step forward and give us your name, please.
My name is Keith Wallenberg. I live at 97 Michaels Way. I share a fence line on Emily. I'm a neighbor of the school. I have at times been a vocal critic of the school and the traffic that they generate. And those of you like Phil that have been here a long time will recognize me in that role. That's not the role in which I'm here today. I'm here in the role of a neighbor who's seen a school that has seen the light, who has implemented meaningful traffic management plans, who has done what they can to mitigate the effect of traffic, who has spread their traffic across the campus, who has changed Emily from a terrifying parking lot to an occasionally congested street. If you take the approach that you're suggesting in the original agreement, and you add a lane on Emily, and you add a lane on Elena, that will reduce the backup on both Emily and Elena. But speaking to what Commissioner Lively spoke of, the disaster that is Valparaiso, you will meter cars onto Valparaiso much faster. And until we have a light upstream of Elena, so that we have platooning in both directions. We have platooning in one direction, westbound. We have no platooning eastbound. I live on Michaels Way. Michaels Way is a scant 150 feet, the length of Mark Marconi's property from Elena. There is no way I'll get out of my street. If you add the second lane that's going to solve the problem, if you do so without a keep clear that includes both Johnson and Michaels Way, which will not be observed and will require a lot of enforcement because the stacking ability of the left turn lane for middle school is inadequate, which is what causes the problem, I will not be able to get to work in the morning, which will not allow me to pay my property taxes and continue to support the town.
Oh, we got to clear that out.
I just want to be as clear as I can. The point of the mitigation measure that was originally required was to reduce the number of trips to improve the functioning of these intersections. The school has reduced traffic by 20%. They've improved the functioning of the intersections. Are they great? No, because you have a school. And when you have a school, even with staggered starts and stops, everybody's there in the morning, everybody's there at the end of school. But for those of us who live nearby, they're way better than they were. And for those of us who'd like to get out of our street, please, whatever you do, don't think that this original mitigation idea was a good one. Thank
Can I
you.
have your name again, please?
It's Keith Wallenberg,
Okay, thank you, Keith.
W-O-L-L-E-N-B-E-R-G. I speak for both myself and for David Wallenberg, my next door neighbor at 85 Michaels Way. He's got the joy of fishing in Alaska while I'm here.
Thank you for your comments.
Yes, please. Step up your name.
Yeah, my name is Doug Kaywart. I live at 98 Michaels Way. Like Keith, I too have not been a big fan of the increase in enrollment at both Menlo and Sacred Heart. They have, I'm certain that enrollment has had an impact on the traffic. But Phil, I'm glad you observed Valparaiso. I don't think all of that can be laid on Sacred Heart and Menlo. There are a lot more reasons for traffic on Valparaiso. Generally, it's gotten worse, and I agree with Keith that both schools have taken steps to correct the problem. My main point in listening to you guys talk about this is I would ask you to think about what the root cause of the problem is and attack that. And the root cause is the schools have more enrollment. More enrollment drives more cars. And what we need to do, I believe, is to attack that, and the traffic, TDM, traffic demand plan, does that. Personally, I do not believe that the Sacred Heart plan that I just read quickly now is as aggressive as the one Menlo has put in place. Menlo has instituted I'm sure it's expensive, busing plan, and that seems to be the single most effective way of getting trips off the street. And if anything, I would encourage Sacred Heart to be more aggressive in their traffic management plan. I think this turn lane idea it seemed like it was good when it was conceived. It wasn't well thought out initially, as is obvious now with the impact on the trees and I think safety. But it's just a Band-Aid. It's not going to address the core problem. So as far as I would encourage you to just drop those turn lanes, work with Sacred Heart to maybe beef up their TDM, and don't destroy the character of our neighborhood by putting turn lanes in and cutting down trees, because it's ultimately it's not going to help. It's just going to move the problem around a little, and it's the wrong thing to do. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please?
Good evening. David McAdoo, Director of Operations and Construction for Menlo School. And I'm just here this evening to maybe restate what I said at the last Planning Commission meeting, and try to give you a sense of this Menlo School's view on the value of the traffic demand management program. Simply put, our TDM program works. At the core of it, and listening to some of the neighbors and listening to some of the commissioners, the thing that's really going to work is to take cars off the street. Don't make it easier for lots of cars to move through a neighborhood. Get them off the street. We have taken a significant number of cars off the street in the 3 years that we've had our TDM program. I'm not here to advertise our TDM program, but just a data point. We added a 4th bus route this year, and the ridership on that bus is about 40 people. That's 40 kids. That's 40 cars in the morning, because they're almost all middle school kids and they have to be driven, and it's 40 cars in the afternoon. That's 80 trips a day. So it comes off of Valparaiso, it comes off of our front entrance, it comes off of Park Avenue, it comes off of Emily and Elena. A wider street will only be a more attractive street and draw more cars from the neighborhood for all kinds of other reasons not associated with Sacred Heart, not associated with Menlo School. The trick is to get them off the street. And I look at what Sacred Heart's trying to do and what they're starting to do. They're a couple of years behind us. They've had some things they have done, but they're really starting to do this in earnest. And it takes a while. You have to change a culture. We have the sort of advantage of our customers cycle through. They're only with us for 6 or 7 years. And it takes a while to, every new class that comes in, every late August when we get new students, they don't know any different. All they know is TDM. And they know that the buses are there and the carpooling programs are there and the walking and the biking and all that. And every year we also lose students who didn't know that as the way Menlo does it. So it takes a while to get the culture changed in the school, although in my view, a 7-year turnover in that is very short time if you're looking at a long-term goal of trying to get cars off the street. It's going to take a couple of years. It's going to take every year we have people who, the first day of school is always, they always want to drive the kids to school and drop them off and make sure that Johnny and Sally are safe they got to school. Our first day We looked on our loop and said, where is everybody? They're not here. And then we saw the buses come in, and the buses had the kids. It's just anecdotal data, and I'm sure that Sacred Heart is going to have exactly the same experience. Our parents, and we're the same school. I mean, we have all the same issues, we have all the same parents. Our parents don't want to get out of bed in the morning to take their kid to school. And if there's a bus that goes by, they're going to put them on the bus. And that just becomes part of the culture. But it does take time sometimes for parents to be convinced that the schedule of the bus coincides with the schedule of the kids and really buy into this. But it's very fast in the school year. So we have this sort of settling down period, and we're just about through that. And we've only been back in school for a week. I mean, it happens pretty fast. But it happens faster for us maybe because we've been doing this for a couple of years, and they can talk to their friends and their neighbors who go to Menlo School, and they get convinced that it does work. The other thing that we have talked about internally, and we don't have any specific plans other than to talk about this, because we see kind of a mutual benefit situation here, where we may not put our kids on the same bus for maybe some obvious reasons. But we have faculty and we have staff who tend to live in the same neighborhoods. Some of them, a lot of our younger staff and faculty live in San Francisco in the city. We have talked about having these sort of van pool kind of arrangements. And I can foresee in the school, and I think Sacred Heart could reinforce this, is that we really see an opportunity to have Sacred Heart and Menlo School faculty and staff in the same van pool, coming from those neighborhoods. We sort of start our business day at the same time, and we end it at the same time. And we see a real opportunity there to maybe do some ride sharing, and both in van pools and car pools. It's early. I would really encourage the commissioners to really think about solving this problem. And in my view, that's fewer cars. Just get the cars off the street. Don't bring them down Valparaiso. Don't bring them down Park Avenue. Don't bring them down Atherton Avenue. Have them stay home. Put the kids on the bus. Get in a van pool. Get in a car pool. Come to school that way. And I think what we're going to see is an increasingly effective mitigation to our part of the traffic on Valparaiso. We cannot control all, as Doug said, it's not all us, but we can control our part better. And the TDM program, as expensive as it is worth it for us. It's also sustainable. We can do this for a long time. We build a wider street, it's going to fill.
Correct.
And then what do you do? Okay, I probably went way past my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anyone else?
Good evening, my name is Mark Spencer. I'm a traffic engineer with W-Trans. We've been working with Sacred Heart Schools for several years on various transportation programs, and we're the authors of the TDM program as well as other traffic evaluations that we've done on behalf of the town of Atherton. I wanted to just briefly address some of the comments that came up to see if we can briefly shed some light on some of the concerns. The first thing is regarding the 6,000 trips, and how did you get to 6,000 trips, and is that part of the EIR, or it just doesn't add up, it just doesn't intuitively feel right? I'm going to start with something that Dave just said, and that is, if you have a bus with 40 kids, and he said, we're taking 80 trips off every day, that's actually an underestimation of the effect of that bus. Because those trips, think about it, the kids get dropped off in the morning, that's a trip into the campus. Then that trip leaves the campus, that's now 2 trips that's counted, in and out, 1 round trip. In the afternoon, parent comes back, it's 3 trips, takes the kid home, that's 4 trips minimally for each kid that gets dropped off that's not in a carpool. If they have after school activities, and then there's staff, and then there's deliveries, the trips start to add up pretty quickly. The numbers in the EIR show not daily trips. There's no indication of daily trips in the EIR at all. It shows AM peak hour, and that's the single peak hour within a peak period, which means some people arrive between, say, 7:30 and 8:30, and some will arrive between 8:30 and 9:30. That's an AM peak period, but only one of those hours is what you see. We're taking the peak of the peak when you do a traffic analysis. Similarly in the afternoon. So you're not seeing the full effect of the daily ins and outs of all those different kids and the other trips that happen throughout the day. In 2008, traffic counts were taken at every driveway around Sacred Heart, and it was about 7,500 trips in and out of the campus at that time. Similar study was undertaken about 6 months ago, again on a typical day, not on the first day or first week of school, not on the first week back after a semester break or something like that. And that's where the 6,000 comes from. That's a 2013 count. If the TDM was based on the EIR numbers, the bar would be set much higher, and the leeway would be a lot more for Sacred Heart. We're trying to drive down the numbers. I think 6,000, which is approximately 5 trips per student as a metric. That doesn't mean each student results in 5 trips, but if you count for students, then you also have to account for all the other trips. The student is the metric by which you're measuring, but you've got staff, and you've got deliveries, and you've got after-school activities, you've got other teams coming in to play games. You've got a whole host of things going on the campus. And for a campus of this size, those numbers track pretty well with how school trips would work. Last month, this came up as well in terms of what happens if we take some time, we're going to analyze, what are the alternatives? Not doing TDM now, but also let's not build a traffic signal and widen the street right now. Are there other alternatives? The town engineer has posed that question to us previously, and so has the planning director for the town. So has Sacred Heart. And the alternatives that are in the EIR are all build alternatives. Short of those, and all of those build alternatives would result in removal of heritage trees. Short of that, you're left with trip reduction. And trip reduction is what led us to the TDM program that we created as the alternative measure. If you go through the environmental analysis and say, okay, let's do the environmental analysis of what the effect of this traffic mitigation is. Yes, you solve you create better level of service and lessen the delay. You have a new signal where there's not a signal now. You've got an extra turn lane. You're not reducing trips. You're rearranging them by putting them at that traffic signal, so you're metering them a little bit differently. But you're not reducing trips. The alternatives to that, and you know that there's going to be tree removal. We know environmentally now what you're talking about is documenting that and then trying to solve that issue. The alternative to that is you reduce trips and you come up with some kind of trip reduction program. That is what a TDM program is. And whether that's created by me on behalf of Sacred Heart or whether it's created by somebody else, that's in essence what you're getting at. So we have a bit of a window as to what are we going to be looking at a year from now. The difference is the TDM program, the more aggressive TDM that we're talking about having Sacred Heart implement at greater expense than building the traffic signal, quite frankly, is they wouldn't be doing that. So you wouldn't be reducing trips in 2013 and 2014. You're kind of just delaying that effect from happening. And that may be worthwhile as an exercise to see, is there something else we can do? But that's where I think we're going to be a year from now if we do, if that action is taken. The other part is there is quite a bit of thought in Atherton. Every project I've worked on here, trees are the #1 issue. And there's a mindset which is beautiful, and it's the policy and the heritage trees of what does it mean to be an Atherton? And removal of trees is not consistent with the town's vision. And we all know that intuitively. So that's why I think we're all struggling with this, quite frankly. Whether it's us working on behalf of somebody or whether it's the commission or whatever. So it's not an easy decision. It's not perfect in any which way. But the idea of trip reduction ultimately is, I think, the best thing we can do for any kind of traffic program. And that's always what we kind of want to do in terms of how do we mitigate the effects of traffic. This week is a difficult one at any school that's just restarting. Having just finished up some work at Oak Knoll and with Hillview, those first couple of days, there's that break-in period of the new parents or people getting back to that. And you have people coming back because now their kids are in school, vacations are over, they're starting normal work patterns. So today there was a significant traffic jump in the Bay Area. Tomorrow's going to get worse because of the bridge situation. But this week in particular is just a very abnormal traffic condition. And yes, there's a lot of traffic that hasn't settled down yet at the Sacred Heart campus. So I can understand, and I think your observations are spot on, and I've seen that. I think as what we look at is what is the condition, or sort of the normalized condition. What will we see 2 months from now, and what will we see 4 months from now? And if there's any other questions, I'm going to stop there, because I'm rambling a bit. But if there's other questions regarding transportation or traffic issues, I absolutely would like to try and answer those if I can.
Yeah, I have one more question.
Yeah.
You mentioned just something a minute ago. You said, that's where we're gonna be a year from now. Restate where you think we're gonna be a year from now.
If the decision is made to do more environmental review and analysis of the traffic mitigation measures, so that we document, okay, we have documented that there's going to be heritage tree removal, and then you have to try and mitigate that. That environmental review, as it takes its place, I think the intent of that is, can we avoid removing trees? So what kind of traffic mitigation can we have that doesn't require removal of trees? And any of the options that fix the traffic delay situation, if you have that same number of vehicles at that intersection, at this point, it's gotten to the point where we require an extra turn lane and a change in traffic control. A stop sign is no longer going to cut it. That's why there's a traffic signal there and the extra turn lane as a recommendation. To build that turn lane requires space. That extra space is what then leads to the removal of the trees. So that's what the environmental analysis will show as it makes its way through a year from now. So we're going to be left with this, I think, the same decision and the same discussion. It's just going to be a year from now we're having that and say, okay, now we know what the situation is with the trees. We know we can't avoid it. Do we want to do the traffic mitigation and remove the trees, or do we want to go into the TDM? It's something that we know right now, but it'll be, let's say, environmentally documented, and that's the difference.
Thank you. Anybody else?
May I make another point that I forgot to make before? You want me to get up to the microphone?
Please.
All right. Yeah, this is just a personal observation, but I don't think trees are the only issue. One of you wisely mentioned the safety of kids walking along the Emily and Valparaiso, and I walk a lot, I run, and when today it's pretty safe, except for the new bushes that Sacred Heart has put in. It's pretty safe to run and walk along Emily. But the one place where a right turn lane, kind of a wimpy one, has been put in is up on Elena, turning right on Park. And as a pedestrian, you don't want to get anywhere near that intersection because you have no space, because cars can just turn around that corner onto Park Lane and they cannot see you. I am concerned that if we take up the space that is at the side of each road now, with turning lanes, there's going to be less space for pedestrians and it's going to be more dangerous. And maybe that can be mitigated by taking out some more trees. But I think this is a real consideration and one that needs to be thought of in addition to just taking out the trees. And I kind of think what our friend, the traffic management consultant, was saying is just make a decision now. Don't prolong it. Just do it.
Vice Chair Lively and members of the Planning Commission, I'm Alicia Guerra with Briscoe, Ivester, and Basil, the attorney representing Sacred Heart Schools. And I wanted to clarify a couple of things because I was the one that sent the letter requesting reconsideration of the decision from last month. And I thought long and hard about this because it was such a confusing issue the last time. But really the reason we did this was to make the record more clear so that everybody knew what they were signing up for. And so, Commissioner Lively, I want to take on your question first about where are we during this interim if perhaps you do decide you want to go through the environmental review process. because that leads to why we went through this process to ask for reconsideration. And it also addresses your question, Commissioner Widmer, about why are we just discounting the agreement that we thought we all had reached in July? Well, the thing is, if you do decide tonight to just say, okay, time out, we're gonna go back and study everything. Well, you need to think about the fact that you have an existing conditional use permit in place, 2 of them, that already say you have to build the road improvements, right? And so we have an extension of time, it turns out, till next summer. But that's the decision. That was the council's decision based on the project that was approved in 2010. So if you decide you want to study this, you don't get any TDM reports. That isn't part of the conditions. That's not in effect. So what you get is, we'll go do the environmental analysis. Now, the reason that the environmental analysis is required is because CEQA says, state law says, that you can't make a decision until you've done your CEQA analysis, your environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act. Well, we did do the environmental review required under the California Environmental Quality Act when we were here in July. Town did that and they prepared an addendum. And that addendum said that it turns out that actually doing TDM has less of an impact and it's more effective as mitigation than what was originally approved in the 2010 EIR. And the reason we had to go through that exercise was twofold. If Sacred Heart were to implement the roadway improvements, yes, it's a condition. Yes, the decision was already made to do it. However, we need a new discretionary approval from Planning Commission and then from the council. And it's that discretionary action that triggers the need for going back and looking at CEQA. So that's the first step. So if we're going to cause a change to the conditional use permits, we have to go through CEQA. Well, we did it partway through the addendum, but the addendum didn't contemplate a scenario where there would be TDM plus do the roadway improvements. Maybe do them later, but you still have to do the roadway improvements. Well, lo and behold, we found out there was new information when the engineers went through the process and the town re-reviewed the more detailed plans, found out there was going to be a significant loss of 11, 12 heritage trees. Well, under CEQA, that is a new significant impact. And the case law and CEQA tell